Evaluate the customers, the actual people you're going to be selling to, and ask yourself this question. Are you interested in those businesses and those business problems that you're going to be solving? And do you think that conversations about those business problems and how to solve them would be interesting to you and would be something you'd be motivated to be an expert about and be motivated to understand and talk about for thousands of hours?
This is the Storytelling for Sales podcast, a show about leveraging the power of storytelling to ignite your sales performance and grow your business.
Hello and welcome to Storytelling for Sales podcast. I'm your host, Bilat, and thank you for listening to our show. We have a very cool guest for you today with more than 20 years of experience in telecommunication and technology-based firms, and he's actually wearing two hats: Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Growth Officer. Today, our guest will speak about three things: the critical importance of being genuinely interested in the conversations you're having with your clients, what type of stories you can use to explain the technology, and last, we will talk about the importance of having a mentor early in your career. As you will hear from the interview, our guest was actually handpicked to lead business development for XO Communications, where he reported directly to a legendary investor, Carl Icahn. So, how does it feel to be coached by a billionaire on one of your first sales jobs? We will find out. Before we start, just a quick thank you to our sponsors at storytellingsales.com, a leading authority on making sales human, and also a good company to talk about storytelling-based sales training solutions to grow your business. Without further ado, Matt Bramson joining us today from Miami, Florida. Matt Bramson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, great having you. So, wow, I was looking at your profile. There's so many things we can talk about today. But before we do this, let me ask you our traditional question. What business success story inspires you and why?
Yeah, I've thought a little bit about this. There's a lot of businesses that inspire me. Any business that's really successful and continues to grow and innovate inspires me. But the one that I probably look at the most as an example is Southwest Airlines.
Southwest Airlines, okay.
Yeah. The lesson that they help me remember is that you can enter a marketplace that's already got lots of competitors in it, and you can identify a customer type that everybody else is either ignoring or not servicing in the way that that customer segment would like to be serviced. And you can build a very big business, and maybe even a bigger, better business than existed for all the competitors before you arrived. You know, that's runs contrary to some people's thinking. They look at a market that's got a lot of players in it and they think, there's nowhere for me to go there. These are big, scary companies.
But everything is already taken, right?
Yeah. But sometimes there's something there that is a large, high margin business opportunity, could exist if you're willing to look for it.
Yeah, so they do exist. We just ignore them because we're thinking, no, it's already crowded.
Those airlines are smart. If there was really a bunch of people who currently drive on their vacations and drive on business trips or just don't travel very much at all because of the expense, then those airlines would have already serviced that market. It doesn't really exist. A lot of people like following a proven model because not as open-ended a risk, or it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, so it's easier to follow than say, okay, I'm going to be trailblazer and I will try something for the first time, right?
Right.
That's an excellent story, so thank you so much for sharing this. Okay, so for our listeners, so let me turn the spotlight back at you. A lot of them know that I love to use a GPS analogy when interviewing my guests, right? As you know, in order for GPS to pinpoint your location, you need at least 3 towers, right? So each tower makes a circle, and then intersection of 3 towers basically shows exactly where you are or your vehicle located. So when I looked at your great profile and great experience, I saw those 3 circles, 3 towers, so to speak. Your sales and marketing experience, your passion for technology industry, and then the final one is your leadership drive. So if you don't mind, I want to talk about each tower or each circle and look for the real stories. Shall we?
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay, great.
You can triangulate me.
Yeah, triangulate, exactly. I'm talking to a technology guy, so now I know for sure. So, sales and marketing experience. So you've been doing this for over 20 years. And currently you do both, right? So you Chief Growth Officer and the Chief Marketing Officer at 2 different companies. So you led multiple cross-functional sales teams, been in charge of significant revenue growth, business development, and in fact, sales and partnership negotiation is one of your specialties. So, how did you even get into sales and marketing, Matt?
It's probably a typical story, I think. When I was in college, I was looking for a job on summer break, and I ended up kind of being tricked a little bit into selling encyclopedias door to door.
Encyclopedias?
That's right. Back when that was a thing, I went around with a
Hmm.
sales trainer and then on my own, literally door to door, knocking on people's doors, asking them if they thought that their children would benefit from a set of high quality encyclopedias in their home. I would knock on hundreds of doors in a week and sit with people in their living rooms and pitch them on this, $1,700 product they were going to pay for the rest of their lives, just about.
Huh.
And I
Interesting.
wasn't that great at it, to be honest, but there was parts of it that I really liked and that excited me. And I kind of decided at that point I was a salesman and I was going to try to be good at it and try to figure out what industrial
Hmm.
fields would be the right ones to take that skill into.
All right. So that obviously would be different sales environment than going door to door.
Yeah. What I liked about it, I think the most, and what sort of drew me to it, is even in the encyclopedia sales process, even though it was pretty canned, I only did it for a summer, it was very focused on identifying a problem in the people's lives. The fact that they, have children, they care about their children's education, but they lack educational materials that are accessible in the home. I mean, this was before
Hmm.
the internet existed, this was before DVDs existed, CD-ROMs existed. This was when, it was the library or whatever you had in your house, and that was all that existed in the realm of educational materials.
No Wikipedia.
Right. So, part of it was focused on essentially making these parents feel guilty that if they really cared about their kids, how could they possibly not have educational materials that are accessible to their kids? And there was something about that psychology of understanding the customer situation, what their aspirations were, what their needs were to achieve those aspirations, and then positioning a product. That kind of detective work, that like strategic thinking, and the fact that you do it on the fly sometimes and have to like pick things out of literally out of midair, maybe even like you see something on the mantelpiece or somebody makes a comment, that kind of planned dialogue along with real time problem solving and case making was interesting to me. It seemed kind of like being a lawyer in a
Hmm.
courtroom or a detective or something, but without as much education and or personal risk and much better reward in some cases.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing this. So, like, a lot of people think that sales are stressful and difficult and painful, and they certainly could be. Like in your transition from encyclopedia world, right, to industrial world, what would be the typical mistakes people make in order to achieve a sales success?
Typical mistakes. The one that I think we almost make as a position, salespeople with a capital S, is that we don't fully understand who we're talking to and what their goals and interests and needs are. We just want to, go immediately to trying to get them excited and impressed with our product.
Yeah, talk about the features, presenting, right,
Yeah,
presenting the
yeah.
solution right away.
Yeah, I had a real kind of plain spoken guy who was my first sales manager. First sales manager, I guess, was the guy I rode around with selling encyclopedias, but my first kind of real corporate job with a sales manager. And he termed that the show up and throw up method.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first day in a real sales job. That just wasn't what you were ever allowed to do if you were a professional. You couldn't just go and invite your prospect into a conference room and put a PowerPoint up, and that was unacceptable.
Well, and a lot of people do that,
Yep,
right? I've been in situations with my sales team, then the power goes off or like laptop goes off and they don't know what to
yep,
do, right? And very often we ask that question. Imagine if your laptop was
yep,
stolen. What would you do? Can you still present and
yep.
communicate?
You phrase it as opportunity to give advice. What I would say to somebody is I would say, obviously evaluate the company that you're looking to sell for. Obviously evaluate their product, evaluate their competitors, their position in the market, and all that stuff. That's all important. But maybe more
Hmm.
than that, evaluate the customers, the actual people you're going to be selling to, and ask yourself this question. Are you interested in those businesses and those business problems that you're going to be solving? And do you think that conversations about those business problems and how to solve them would be interesting to you and would be something you'd be motivated to be an expert about and be motivated to understand and talk about for thousands of hours? I don't really care about automating HR processes and how much more efficient and compliant that would be. And I don't really care about the pain that HR people have with paperwork and how they spend less time counseling people in real productive ways than they could. None of that matters to me. Then I'd say, well, then you ought not to be selling HR solutions because those people and their problems and their victories need to be your fuel. And if they're not, then you should reconsider. I think I got this from my father, who's a physician, who was constantly reading medical journals. It just seemed like I didn't even notice it as a thing until I got a little bit older. But he was constantly educating himself on his field, and he was doing it in his free time and doing it for fun. That's kind of what I've always thought about, is that if I'm not reading about what I am selling and my customers and what their industries are doing and where they're going and who's surging and who's slipping, if I'm not interested in that enough to read it, for pleasure.
So if you don't care about their story, so you certainly are not going to be excited about selling yours,
That's
right?
right.
Now that's a great advice. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's talk about the second circle, the technology industry, because I know this is your true passion. This is something you are excited. And again, you do it at the two companies at the same time, right?
Yep.
Sales and marketing. So Infonex and RingByName. So private label voice over IP services, right? And the cloud services company. And you've been doing it again for 20 years. So how did you pick up the technology industry? What was the transition from the encyclopedia sales door to door to technology?
I kind of fell into it. I was looking for a job. I was just out of college, and I was in the career center, not even my college, the college where my brother and sister went, which is a similar college to mine, but not the same school. And I, saw that there was a recruiter from a company that was looking to hire, people with basically no qualifications, just, well-educated liberal arts graduates. And so I went to the interview, and what it was this really amazing pre-internet based technology. It was kiosks that were installed in music stores that enabled you to listen to and rate music before you buy it, like a listening post in a music store. But imagine a listening post that has 400 compressed CD-ROMs in jukeboxes inside of it, and it can play 25,000 different music clips from thousands of albums. And so I got
So it's iTunes.
yeah, it was a precursor to everything that exists today, and I learned a lot about like the music industry, and MTV was still a big thing then. This was early 90s.
Oh, interesting.
And so I got hired basically to be a field technician. They had took me out and trained me, but they were really had an eye towards people that they thought could be good brand ambassadors for them in the music stores. And what I ended up doing with them is innovating something that didn't exist previously, as far as I know. It was basically interactive advertising. I noticed that took seconds for the CD-ROMs to spin up and load a music clip. So I talked to them about sticking ads in there. And what was unique about our ad platform, which at that point, is that we had people fill out a profile before they got a card with a barcode to use the machine. So we could target the ads and we could track the ads. And then we slapped a Catalina marketing coupon printer on the top and could print ads out. And what I got to do, which was pretty crazy, I got to sell coupons and advertising programs inside of a music store that was oftentimes inside of a mall. You and I can't walk through a mall and hand out coupons. The mall security will toss us right out of there.
Right away,
But
right.
my machine was printing coupons, giving you, I don't know, buy one, get one free from Chick-fil-A or whatever. In the mall, you're not on your couch, you're not on watching TV, you're in the mall, you're 300 feet from the Chick-fil-A, and you've got your wallet and your stomach right there. And so we started selling that, and the company didn't succeed. We got in licensing fights with the music labels, and they didn't buy into ceding control of their retail stranglehold, to us in our kiosk. So we became kind of frenemies, and then they just stopped funding us, and the company, ran out of money. But that's what hooked me on the idea that you had this product that we built for one purpose, but because it was software and technology, we could change it on the fly and add something to it that was a whole nother revenue stream, a whole nother business model that could be stood up, and that kind of how unique and powerful that was. That's what really excited me about technology.
This is cool. And it sounds like you were ahead of time again, right? Because everything you just described is what YouTube does today. The video clips mixed with the advertising, and which allows you to rate and target.
That's right.
Right. So this is technology ahead of time. I listened to one of your recent interviews, and when you were talking about the difference between unified communication and unified messaging, and how you're trying to get away from that technical lingo by talking plain language. Could you tell us about the stories which actually help you guys explain the technology to your current customers or partners? Anything comes to mind in terms of storytelling, explaining the technology?
Sure, yeah. what probably provoked me the most to respond to, I mean, I respond to pretty much everybody who reaches out to me on LinkedIn and elsewhere, but your whole concept about the importance of storytelling in sales, I've always believed that. In fact, I had a manager that specifically mandated that we have stories, and he had 4 types of stories that he needed us to be able to tell.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more. What are these
Well,
stories?
he listed them out. That the 4 stories you got to be able to tell. The fourth one I'm not so sure about, but I think he's probably right. You need stories about personal experiences. That's number one. How did you start selling this? How did you come to work for this company? Those types of things. What's your personal
Okay.
connection to the product or
Personal.
the service that you're selling? The second type of story is stories about a real customer or client. This customer became a customer, and these good things happened because of it. The third type of story
Mm-hmm.
are stories about a signature event in the history of the company. How did we get founded? How did we get funded? Why did so and so company decide to merge with us? Why did Federal Express become a customer? Something like that. And then the fourth type of story is you might want to have a story about a customer or prospect that went with the competition and what went wrong.
So sort of like a failure,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
it's a failure which was basically teaching
Yeah.
you a lesson.
Yep. Customer that
Mm-hmm.
switched away from us and everything went sideways, or a prospect that went a different way, went conservative, and now is spending more money than they thought they were going to, and they regret it. And they call me every week, telling me that they wish they hadn't made the mistake. Those would be the 4 types. He expected you to be able to rattle it off. Tell me your story. How'd you decide to start selling for this company? And you'd have to make it specific and personal,
Mm-hmm.
and try to have an emotional component to it. He didn't get really too specific into the mechanics of it. Expected you to kind of be able to figure it out from there.
Ah, interesting. The fourth type of story is particularly interesting, right? Because you're not just saying like rah rah rah, so I'm the best. You should do business with us. You also acknowledge your failure,
Right.
right? And that makes you sincere, human, and also like I'm not afraid to show that I actually
Right.
failed before. That would build a human connection, and a lot of people don't do that,
Right.
right? Because they say, no, well, I'm just going to show my good side because nobody wants to talk to a
Well,
loser. It doesn't work like
well,
that.
there's also something it seems like a lot of us are reluctant to admit. We know it intuitively, and that is that the most powerful human motivator is fear. So if you're not using fear in your sales efforts, then you're leaving the sharpest arrow in your quiver. Sure, you can motivate people with reason and with all kinds of proof of improved productivity and lowered costs and all that. But if they don't fear something, they don't fear made to look bad because they didn't make a change,
Mhm.
or fear that they're going to, get passed by their competition. If you don't use fear at all, because you're trying to be, high-minded and trying not to be manipulative, you're not using your best weapon. Now, you've got to be careful with fear because people have their radar tuned in for it. But I guess my first manager, his feeling was, don't leave it out. If you don't give them a little bit of a taste of downside of not doing business with you, then you haven't probably motivated most of them.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. That's excellent advice and the four type of stories. So definitely our listeners could utilize that. Okay, let's move to your leadership circle, the last circle of the last tower when we're triangulating, right? So you chief marketing officer and you chief growth officer. You've been on the board of several associations. Again, leading multiple teams, strategy formulation. You've been doing it for a long time. What type of stories come to mind which actually helped you to grow as a leader?
I've had a lot of good experiences and learned from a lot of people, but probably the most sort of dramatic and best known person that I had a chance to work with closely was billionaire investor Carl Icahn. Yeah,
Uh-huh. So, yeah,
yeah,
the icon.
Carl acquired a telecom company that I worked for, and the president of that company was being driven a little bit crazy by Carl pestering him about certain things, that he appointed me to be Carl's liaison on a bunch of things.
That's early in
Yeah,
the
yeah, I
career,
was
right?
that was about 15 years ago. And so
15 years
so
ago.
I worked
Hmm.
in Carl's office. I traveled with him. I spoke to him on the phone at least 2 or 3 times a day, met with him face to face at least once a day, and that was for over a year. And I learned 2 things most vividly from him have helped me a lot. One is I learned that when you're dealing with people at that level, and Carl is in an orbit with guys like Leon Black and Howard Lorber and Nelson Peltz and John Catsimatidis and Donald Trump and other leaders of business and government leaders and all that, on the phone with those types of guys all day, every day. What I learned is when you're in a room with those sorts of people, your level of preparation has to be extremely high. You have to anticipate every question that they're like to ask you, because if you aren't prepared, it's not going to go well for you. These guys operate in the moment. If they're talking about something, then they want to get a decision on
Answer.
it and they want to get action on it. They don't want to hear, I'll get back to you, or let me research that, or that's a good thing for us to focus group and come back to you on. They want to know, like, what are the facts, and they want to make decisions and they want to move on. That first lesson is not so counterintuitive. It's just one of those things that you don't realize how many notches above normal preparation you need to be. You really have to sit and ask yourself, hey, if I'm making this decision, what questions am I going to ask? What concerns am I going to have? What doubts am I going to have? And make sure you've thought all those out. You have answers. The second thing I learned is that when you're in that room and you're in that discussion, you're in there for a reason. And if you have an opinion and you don't express it, then you won't be in that room again. And so speak up. If you have something to say, speak up. Don't be shy. Don't be intimidated. If you just kind of nod your head and you do that for, too many meetings in a row, you won't be in there. You won't be in the room anymore.
Huh. Okay, so that would be in contradiction to, what we see in the movies. They say, okay, and you only speak if you are spoken to, right? So that's not
Yeah.
that's
Well,
not the
I mean,
case, right?
you got to calibrate it just right. I mean, obviously, you don't want to dominate the conversation. You don't want to be speaking up about things that you're not a recognized expert on, or the person that's supposed to be kind of, speaking to that. But if the topic is around your area of expertise and you're just kind of nodding your head or saying, okay, yeah, I think that's great, or, whatever you guys think, you're, and sometimes that feels like the right thing to do because, heck, this guy owns the whole company. I mean, the case of the company I worked for, it was a $2 billion company, but Carl owned the whole friggin' thing. I mean, he owned like 87% or something. So, you feel a little bit weird telling him what you think is the best thing to do with his company, but that's why you're there.
Interesting. So be prepared and speak up. Otherwise, you won't be in
That's
that
right.
meeting again. That's a very interesting insight. So thank you so much for sharing that. In terms of the leadership overall, what challenges do you see facing many of today's leaders, and particularly sales leaders?
I feel like sales, at least in the space that I'm in right now, is in a bit of a fight for relevancy. I feel like largely due to our own shortcomings, mainly aversion to process and aversion to consistent activity, marketing has kind of taken over
Mm-hmm.
in some respects. And in the telecom industry, for example, most of the big providers, I worked for a service provider that was a $2 billion company. At one time, we had 1,700 salespeople just at the national level and hundreds of salespeople at the local level. Now that same company has no salespeople.
At all?
Well, over the
1,700
last
people gone?
10, 15 years, yeah, because what they've done is they predominantly rely on indirect sales channels, telecom master agencies, IT consultancies, other, channel partners. And then they have call centers with people that handle smaller customers and customer support and stuff. And that's the same thing with, I mean, Comcast doesn't have an army of salespeople out there
Mm-hmm.
calling on business people. There's a move away from direct salespeople. And I feel like there's a gap that sales needs to fill and assert. And that's the gap of really being the tip of the spear, of communicating to the customers, of understanding the customer's needs and driving for an action.
That's very relevant because you do see both sides, right? So you in sales and marketing, and now you're saying there's a shift to marketing versus sales, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was on a call the other day with the folks from Salesforce, and they were going through the statistics, and they obviously have vast perspective into sales and marketing processes through all their thousands of customers with, millions of users. And they were trotting out some statistics that were appalling, right? The percentage of leads that never ever get followed up by anyone in sales ever was, like 75%. And then the number of times that the average lead has to be contacted to be a sale was like 7 times, but only like 1 or 2 or 3% of the leads ever get contacted that often. Most salespeople give up after 2 or 3 tries. Most give up after zero. I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, wow, that's either completely true and horrifying, or there's some degree of truth to that, and there's a lot of salespeople doing a lot more work than they're taking credit for in the CRM, but probably not, right? Probably that's really what's happening. And so no
Yeah,
wonder
yeah.
marketing tries to automate more stuff and tries to nurture leads more and tries to get things closer to a sale before they give them to the salespeople, because when they give them to the salespeople, they go into a black hole. And so as salespeople, I feel like we've kind of been pretending that sales is some kind of an art that you can't quantify and you can't put in a box and you can't CRM me to death. I think we need to, to revisit some of that, as a brother and sisterhood, we need to get our act together, because a lot of companies are saying, what do we need salespeople for? We're just going to get a bunch of marketing and automation, and then we're going to, when the leads are really, really hot, we're going to hand them off to a channel partner who has a complementary product or service. We don't have to pay any salaries. Commissions are only paid on performance, and we have no sales guys running around with travel and entertainment, sexual harassment problems, and all the other stuff that sales reps bring. Because if they're not going to follow up with the leads anyway, then who needs them?
Well, that's a very relevant point. So thank you for bringing this up. It's certainly going to be a challenge for today's sales leaders. That's great and a great reasoning. So I agree with you absolutely. Our last question for today. So what does the art of storytelling means to you personally?
Like I said before, the art of storytelling as a concept is very compelling to me. The first book that captivated me, probably because my teacher was tremendous. I had an English teacher who went on to become the Assistant Solicitor General of the United States. We read the
Oh,
Iliad and the Odyssey, which were, stories that were passed on for hundreds of years before they were ever written down. And they tell important stories about a culture and about a set of values and a way of living and a way of prioritizing things. And I was always intrigued by that. I think that storytelling is a crucial part of communicating. I think that's really what I'm talking about sales reclaiming the role, is the art of telling the story and of telling the right story and of calibrating it like I used to do in the living rooms selling encyclopedias, is really what sales needs to recapture and own. And obviously you can't tell stories if you're not following up with leads and doing the blocking and tackling. I think my first sales manager really, was onto something, that if you have an arsenal of stories that you can tell, that's really what customers are looking to connect with. They're looking to understand, your story and their story can intermesh, and what kind of a positive journey you can go on together. It's tempting to think that for some people, I guess, that you can get there with PowerPoints and, lists of bullet pointed features and stuff.
you really need that connection. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's been proven for millennia. If you want people to grab onto and pass on and absorb big ideas, use stories.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this. And for our listeners, what's the best way to contact you in your company?
Probably the easiest is just to email me. It's Matt, M-A-T-T, at Inphonics, INPHONEX.com.
Okay, great. So I'll be sure to include the email address and perhaps LinkedIn profile as well for our listeners. If they have any questions, they passionate about the technology and would like to connect with Matt, certainly will be happy to do that. So Matt, thank you so much for examining each of the three circles. I counted at least 5 or 6 really interesting stories. I think would be tremendous benefits to our listeners. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you, Matt.
That does it for this episode of Storytelling for Sales. You'll find show notes and links on our webpage, storytellingsales.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.